In the latest issue of the Journal of Behavioral and Brain Sciences, there was some controversial research on politics, and researchers looked into what makes conservatives conservative. And they had an open forum where other scientists can comment and respond to the findings that they're laying out there. Now, Chris Mooney weighed in on this. I think his name is Chris Mooney. I might be butchering that. I think I'm right, though. Something Mooney. See how well prepared I am for this segment. And I actually read a book of his. It's the Republican War on Science, I think it's called. And in that book, he basically lays out an argument where he says everybody tries to say that the difference in political beliefs stems from culture and stems from what you're taught. And it stems from this idea that your mind is a lump of clay and then we shape it during your youth and then eventually you become the person you are today. In other words, he argues that it's not nurture that leads somebody to have their political beliefs that they have. It's nature. It's kind of already hardwired in your head via your genetics or your DNA or your biology, and it is what it is. It's kind of a deterministic worldview on this specific situation of what your political beliefs are. So the research found that, by and large, conservatives are quicker to respond to threatening stimuli. So they're more panicky. And the policies that they're in favor of reflect that. So, for example, they always talk about a strong military and tough law enforcement and resistance to immigration, as we're seeing right now, and the widespread availability of guns because they want to have their guns because they're afraid that the whole world is out to get them. And what the researchers do is they call this a negativity bias. And they say conservatives have a negativity bias. And what it is they're yearning for order and structure and also closure. They look for black and white answers. They avoid nuance. You could see that any day on Fox News where they try to paint something that's very nuanced in a black and white way. That's what Bill O'Reilly and Sean Hannity's show is based on. Republicans are right about everything. Democrats suck on everything. It's beware the Muslims and the immigrants and the black people and fucking love the old white males. It's just this very black and white world that they live in, quite literally. And they want consistency and simplicity and familiarity. These are the terms that the researchers are using. So what happened when these findings were opened up to other scientists? Okay, how did they respond to it? Well, originally, Chris Mooney thought, and there's some evidence to back up, that scientists were averse to this idea because they think it's bordering on the idea of eugenics, which is, that there are some hardcore scientific superiorities and inferiorities in different human beings, and that's a slippery slope to go down because we all know how that ended up when, Nazi Germany embraced the junk science that is eugenics. Eugenics, it's not actually based on science. It's totally arbitrary. They would say, I don't know, Jews, you have big noses and you're inferior because your noses are big. Like, what does that even mean? What are you saying? That sounds silly, right? Because it is silly and it's factually incorrect. So scientists were at first averse to this idea because it was connected to that other different idea of eugenics, which we know is false. But what a lot of the researchers said now is 22 out of 23 of them accepted the general idea that when it comes to conservatives, they really do have some hardcore differences in their brain structure and in their actual, biological makeup compared to liberals. And this harkens back to the old idea and the old debate, it's seemingly as old as time, of nature versus nurture. How much of what you do is purely nature and how much of what you do is purely nurture? What you find is usually there's, like uber liberals would fall on the purely nurture side. That's, Karl Marx is a perfect example. He didn't just write about economic systems. He was also a philosopher. And one of the things he argued was everything about you is you're a lump of clay and you're fucking molded into one thing or another thing. And how you act is totally based on that. And then usually far-right people argue the opposite, this nature idea. Like you oftentimes hear, conservatives say that, well, these minority communities, they're not doing well. It's just because of who they are. It's inherent in who they are. If you're black, you're just lazy and you don't work as hard. And it's that, silly idea. So what's the reality? Again, 22 out of 23 researchers are accepting the idea that nature plays the majority role when it comes to the conservative mindset. Are they right or are they wrong? Look, I think it's 50-50. And you guys know me, I'm the biggest to say don't buy into the stupid false equivalence garbage. But here's the thing, I don't think this one is a false equivalence. I think it's a genuine equivalence. I think that on this topic, there's an actual balance in real life. So let me explain what I mean. On some issues, I think it's almost all nurture, okay? So poverty, for example, when it comes to the issue of poverty, there are so many variables that go into what your income level ends up being. You know, how lucky you are, who you know, how hard you work, where you were born, certain social skills and personality skills. So much goes into it that with something like, do you live in poverty or are you rich, et cetera, that is mostly nurture, right? An area like that. But then when you go to other topics like, your sexuality, that's almost totally nature. So, for example, gay people, they're not choosing to be gay, they're fucking born gay. They're just interested in people of the same sex. And by the same token, people are born straight, and some people are born bi, and some people, it's a spectrum, the Kinsey scale they call it, where you fall somewhere on that spectrum. That's almost solely nature, right? Like your hair color, nature. I mean, we could go on with some obvious things that are nature, and I could point out obvious things that are nurture. But look, I think with a lot of things, if not most things, it's a mix of both within that one topic. So when it comes to politics, it's not just your nature that makes you conservative or liberal or believe one thing or the other thing, which is kind of what they're leaning towards. The researchers aren't outright saying that, but they're leaning in that direction, that it's more nature than nurture. But the flip side is also not true. I don't think it's purely nature what your political beliefs are, but I also don't think it's purely nurture. We're not all just a lump of clay that you can shape in one way or another, like Karl Marx believes. And look, the perfect example of that is Karl Marx thought, based on that philosophy, that, people will be able to work within an economic system of communism where it's from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. In other words, just work whenever you want, however you want, and we'll just provide for everybody's basic needs. Turns out that wasn't possible because it was like trying to force a river to flow in the opposite direction. It was too against our nature, So I think it's both. I think about 50% of what makes up your political beliefs might be what you're more inclined to feel like on a nature-based biological DNA genetic level, in the sense that you might be very a panicky kind of person and you're scared of the other, and it's this in-group, out-group, tribal-like mentality. Well, that's usually associated more with being a conservative, right? And then you might have this other part of you that you grew up in an environment where, I don't know, liberals raised you, your parents were Democrats, and they kind of taught you to be open-minded and to do, look through data and try to come to your own conclusions and be rational, and then that side of you would be more liberal. So I think with political beliefs, it's not all nature and it's not all nurture. It's definitely a mix of the two. You might be inclined towards to lean a certain way or another way, but also your environment and how you were raised and, your income level and your parents' income level and your view of the world and your personal experiences, that all weighs in on it too. So it's both. It's not just nature, it's not just nurture. And I do think that, at least in this case, Chris Mooney, and I've read his book, The Republican War on Science, and all the other researchers here, I think they're doing a little bit of a disservice to lean too far in favor of the nature side. Because essentially what you're saying, if you say that, is no matter how much education you give somebody, if they're born to be a conservative, then they're going to be a conservative. And I don't think that's true. You could be born with your nature leaning heavily on the side of being conservative, but if you go to a good school and you learn facts and you learn reality and you learn history, it's very possible you can become progressive. So again, this is one of those situations where it's, in my opinion, it appears to be that the reality is mixed. Like a lot of things / probably most things in life, nature plays into it and nurture plays into it. That's not to say that some things aren't purely nature, and that's not to say that some things aren't purely nurture. For sure that exists, absolutely. But most things, including your political beliefs, I think are a mix of both.